The grand auditorium of Leyland University is completely packed. Students, professors, and researchers from across the country fill every seat, surrounded by an expectant murmur. On stage, Chancellor Stern steps up to the podium with a proud smile. His voice echoes with authority as he introduces the main guest of the 8th Annual Neuroscience Symposium, Dr. Alex Nelson, whom he describes as one of the brightest and most promising minds in the field. He speaks of his talent, his academic impact, and the revolutionary future represented by his research. When Nelson appears, the audience erupts in applause. He walks forward confidently, gives a restrained wave, and stands before the microphone. Before beginning his speech, he takes the bottle of water prepared for him, drinks a sip, and without warning, his body collapses. The sharp sound of his fall cuts through the excitement in the auditorium. For several seconds, no one reacts until panic takes over the room. Hours later, at CBI headquarters, the phone rings insistently. Rigsby answers and, after listening briefly, covers the receiver and tells Patrick Jane that the call is for him. It is a doctor named Miller. Jane, with his usual carefree attitude, says he is not there, but almost immediately changes his mind. He takes the phone and, unusually for him, appears uncertain and tense, as if every word carries more weight than usual. After hanging up, Jane heads straight to Teresa Lisbon's office. He asks whether a murder at a state university falls under CBI jurisdiction. Lisbon replies that it could, as long as they can get the local police to step aside. Jane, with an unusual seriousness, asks her for a personal favor, to take charge of the case. He gives very little explanation, but his tone makes it clear that this matters to him. Meanwhile, at the local police station, Sophie Miller is being questioned. She is an intelligent woman, calm on the surface, although the pressure is beginning to show in her eyes. The officers waste no time. They remind her that Alex Nelson was her ex-husband, and that, for this reason, she has become the prime suspect. Several witnesses saw her arguing with him shortly before his death, and they also saw her leave the area in a hurry. They ask how a 10% hydrogen cyanide solution ended up in the bottle of water. They also bring up old incidents of violence and conflicts during their relationship. Sophie firmly replies that all of that is in the past, and that they had both decided to bury it so they could work together as professional colleagues. From an adjoining room, behind a one-way mirror, Patrick, Jane, and Teresa Lisbon watch the interrogation. Lisbon asks Jane why he is so convinced Sophie is innocent. He simply replies that it is because she told him she did not do it. He gives no further details, and his cryptic attitude makes it clear that there is something else he is not willing to share yet. Lisbon and Jane discuss the case with a high-ranking local police officer. The man is convinced Sophie will eventually confess if they keep pressuring her. Lisbon disagrees. She argues that they do not have enough evidence to hold her, and, using her authority, claims jurisdiction over the case for the CBI. The argument becomes tense, until a young officer interrupts with a flyer that has been posted all over the university. It comes from the Animal Equality League. It states that Alex Nelson got what he deserved for the experiments he conducted on animals. With this new information, Lisbon points out that they now have more suspects to consider. Reluctantly, the local officer is forced to give in. Back at CBI headquarters, Lisbon and Director Minnelli meet with Chancellor Stern. On the table are activist posters, explicit threats, and warnings directed at a scientist named Louis Stutzer. Stern explains that Nelson and Sophie Miller worked alongside Stutzer at the Stutzer Institute, one of the university's academic pillars. He makes it very clear that Stutzer's research is vital to the institution's prestige and future, and asks that the case be handled with absolute discretion. When the Chancellor leaves, Minnelli reprimands Lisbon for getting involved in an animal rights case, fearing it could become a media scandal that would be difficult to control. Later, Patrick Jane shows up in Lisbon's office to thank her for not telling the director that he pressured her to take the case. Lisbon, tired of half-truths, demands an explanation. She reminds him of everything she has risked for him and tells him she deserves to know why he is helping Sophie Miller. Jane closes the door and, with visible difficulty, tells her the truth. Sophie was his psychiatrist after the murder of his wife and daughter. During his emotional breakdown, he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, and she was the one who treated him. Lisbon receives the confession with respect and gratitude, she asks no further questions. At that moment, Van Pelt enters to report that Rigsby reviewed the university's security footage and that she has been investigating the Animal Equality League, but so far they have found nothing relevant. Shortly afterward, Jane and Lisbon travel to the university and visit the Stutzer Institute. There they are greeted by Carrie Sheehan, Dr. Stutzer's assistant. When they ask about Alex Nelson, her reaction is strange, restrained, almost uncomfortable. She simply says that he was a good man. Then she leads them to Stutzer's office, where they finally come face to face with the heart of the scientific research surrounding the entire case. In the laboratory, Stutzer introduces them to a chimpanzee named Susie. He explains that when she arrived, she was aggressive, especially around food, but after a specific area of her brain was altered, she became docile and cooperative. Jane watches everything closely. Stutzer admits that the activists have threatened them before, but says he is not intimidated and shows them that he keeps a gun for protection. Proudly, he continues explaining that his technology could eradicate human violence and create a more peaceful world. He even shows them another room where the first stages of human experimentation have already begun. When they leave the institute, Sophie Miller unexpectedly appears. The encounter is awkward. Lisbon, sensing the tension, decides to leave them alone and waits in the car. Sophie thanks Patrick for helping her get out of custody, although he clarifies that the Animal Equality League paid her bail. There is an obvious connection between them, complex and difficult to define. They speak briefly, but many questions remain unanswered, especially about the true nature of their relationship. As the case moves forward, Patrick Jane cannot get Sophie Miller out of his mind. The way they said goodbye, the things she did not say, and the questions she avoided answering leave him with an uneasy feeling. Even so, he returns his attention to the investigation. At CBI headquarters, Cho, Van Pelt, and Rigsby spend hours reviewing the university's security footage. The process is slow and tedious, but eventually something catches their attention: a suspicious van that appears near the scene shortly before Alex Nelson's death. Although the license plate is only partially visible, a logo on one of the sides identifies the company that owns it. With that information, the team quickly organizes an operation. They travel to a building that appears abandoned, dark, and silent, with dusty windows and rusty doors. When they enter, they find a scene that is as strange as it is disturbing. A disheveled man, wearing nothing but an undershirt, sits calmly in an armchair, surrounded by cats freely moving around the place. Back at the station, Cho questions the man. He confesses without much resistance to killing Alex Nelson, and says he also planned to kill Dr. Stutzer because of his cruel treatment of animals. He speaks with disturbing conviction, and after confessing, casually asks if he can go home to feed his cats. When Cho asks him about the Animal Equality League, the man explains that it is a group that believes animals should have exactly the same rights as humans. He proudly identifies himself as the organization's Supreme Council president. Although his behavior borders on madness, he knows enough about the crime to justify keeping him in custody while his belongings are examined and a psychiatric evaluation is requested. Even so, something still does not add up. Meanwhile, Lisbon and Jane go to interview Emily Nelson, Alex's widow. Her house is silent, almost oppressive, filled with unopened boxes and floral arrangements that no one seems to have touched. Emily is a fragile, shy woman, visibly overwhelmed by her husband's death and the funeral preparations. Lisbon asks her direct questions while Jane moves around the house, observing small details, as he usually does. Emily remembers one occasion when she went to Alex's office and heard him arguing with a woman. She thinks she heard the name Rosie, although she is not sure. Jane approaches her, gently takes her hand, and speaks with a strange mixture of warmth and firmness. He advises her that after the funeral, she should go far away, somewhere beautiful, and start over. He asks her to promise that she will fight her tendency to depend on controlling men. Emily shyly nods, almost like a child seeking approval. When they leave the house, Jane comments that Emily would not be capable of killing anyone unless someone ordered her to do so in a firm, authoritative voice. That observation immediately makes him think of Carrie Sheehan, Dr. Stutzer's assistant. Jane explains that Alex Nelson was an extremely controlling man and seemed to have a very specific preference for a certain type of woman. Both Sophie and Emily were natural brunettes who dyed their hair blonde. Carrie is also blonde, and her strange reaction when talking about Alex strengthens the suspicion that they were having a secret relationship. When they arrive at Carrie Sheehan's house, the atmosphere is eerily silent. The door is partially open. Inside, they find her sitting in a chair, dead. On the floor is a bottle of poison and a short note that simply says, "Forgive me," making it appear to be a suicide. The medical examiner confirms that the cause of death is cyanide, the same poison that killed Alex Nelson. Van Pelt finds a torn photograph of Alex and Carrie together in the trash, further supporting the theory that they were romantically involved. Shortly afterward, outside the house, Chancellor Stern speaks as if the case has been solved. He implies that Carrie's death closes the matter and that the CBI is no longer needed. Lisbon refuses to allow it. She makes it clear that even if Carrie committed suicide, that does not prove she was the person who killed Alex, and that the investigation will continue. Back at CBI headquarters, Lisbon gathers the team and reviews the facts. She explains that Carrie's suicide appears staged. Suicide notes written by women are usually long and explanatory, filled with emotions, not just a brief sentence. Van Pelt adds that it makes no sense for a scientist to choose such a painful death when she had access to medications that could have allowed her to die without suffering. Jane suggests that perhaps Carrie felt so guilty that she wanted to punish herself. Lisbon notices that Jane is eager to close the case, which is unusual for him, and points it out. Jane replies that she wants to finish it too, but Lisbon clarifies that all she really wants is the truth. She insists that Sophie remains an important suspect because of her emotional connection to Alex. Jane then suggests that they visit Sophie to finally clear up the questions surrounding Alex and Carrie's deaths. Before they leave, Jane advises Lisbon on how to handle the conversation with Sophie, as if he can anticipate every reaction. At the Stutzer Institute, Sophie and a colleague conduct a test in front of them. They observe a subject responding to ethical dilemmas while an electrical current is applied to a specific area of the brain. Sophie explains that the questions remain the same, but they can manipulate the subject's moral response, pushing them toward good or evil, effectively overriding conscious thought. Jane is fascinated, almost excited, by the idea of participating in the experiment, both as the subject and as the controller. Meanwhile, Lisbon takes Sophie aside and directly asks her about Carrie Sheehan's death. She also asks whether Sophie knew that Carrie and Alex were having a relationship. Sophie admits that Carrie had told her she was involved with a married man, but says she did not know it was Alex. Lisbon and Van Pelt are surprised, since Carrie and Sophie did not appear to be particularly close. At that moment, Jane makes a crucial discovery. The monkey inside the cage is not Susie, but Rosie. Susie never became docile. The experiment had failed, and the animals had been switched to falsify the results. Sophie eventually admits the switch and finally acknowledges that the entire project is a fraud, although she insists they were very close to achieving a real breakthrough. Jane begins to believe Sophie is involved somehow, but she firmly denies having anything to do with the murders. He becomes frustrated when he realizes that Sophie knew Alex and Carrie's deaths were being used to cover up the fraud, yet she still said nothing. Jane asks whether Stutzer was the killer, but she says she does not know. Before leaving, Jane tells her he will give her a chance. If she is guilty, she can leave the country and disappear. Sophie calls him back only to reaffirm, once again, that she had nothing to do with the deaths. Jane then begins preparing the final trap. Patrick Jane sets his plan in motion with absolute calm, as if everything has already been decided in his mind. While the rest of the CBI team watches from a distance, he speaks on the phone with Director Minnelli. The conversation is brief and tense. Minnelli flatly refuses to authorize what Jane is proposing, fully aware of the risk involved. Even so, when Jane hangs up, he lets everyone believe he has been given the green light. No one stops him. They all know that when Patrick acts this way, something important is about to happen. Shortly afterward, Sophie Miller approaches Dr. Stutzer with barely contained excitement and tells him that the morality engine works. In the laboratory, Patrick sits in the experimental chair, connected to sensors and wires. First, they calibrate his brain toward good. They present him with an ethical dilemma, and he chooses the morally correct option without hesitation. Then Sophie adjusts the system toward evil. Faced with the same dilemma, Patrick makes the opposite choice, selfish and cruel. The contrast is so clear that it is disturbing. Stutzer is ecstatic. To him, this is the ultimate confirmation of years of work. They call Chancellor Stern so he can witness the experiment. Stern watches in fascination, convinced that he is witnessing a discovery that will change the world and secure the university's eternal prestige. When the experiment ends, Patrick removes the sensors and leaves the control room. They ask him to return so they can recalibrate his brain back to normal, but he refuses. Sophie warns that Patrick is still calibrated toward evil. The atmosphere changes immediately. The tension becomes palpable, and everyone rushes after him into the adjoining room. Suddenly, Patrick grabs Stutzer's gun and points it directly at the professor. His voice is firm, cold, almost unrecognizable. He says that good people do good things and bad people do bad things, and that now he is going to find out what everyone's true nature really is. With the gun raised, he asks Stutzer who killed Alex Nelson and Carrie Sheehan. Terrified, Stutzer insists that he does not know. Jane does not believe him. He turns the gun and points it at Sophie. He tells Stutzer that if he does not tell the truth, he will kill her. In the middle of the tension, Jane winks at Sophie, an almost imperceptible gesture that she immediately understands. Without the professor or the chancellor noticing, Patrick fires. Sophie falls to the floor. Outside the laboratory, the rest of the CBI team waits calmly, knowing that everything is part of the act. Inside, Patrick continues applying pressure, alternating threats between Stutzer and Stern. Finally, he points the gun at the chancellor and demands the truth. Stutzer continues denying everything. Patrick cocks the gun, making it clear that he is not joking. Fear breaks Stern. In a panic, he confesses. He admits that he killed Alex Nelson and Carrie Sheehan. He says he did it to protect the university and, above all, to protect Stutzer. He could not allow Alex to expose the morality engine fraud and destroy years of investment, prestige, and ambition. He reveals that he kept the cyanide in the basement of his house and gives precise instructions on where to find it. At that moment, Lisbon enters the room and arrests Chancellor Stern. Realizing that Sophie is not actually injured and that everything was a trap, Stern tries to take back his confession and claims that it is invalid because it was obtained under coercion. Lisbon calmly informs him that agents are searching his house with a warrant. They read him his rights and take him away in handcuffs. Patrick watches the scene with quiet satisfaction. Stutzer, on the other hand, is completely devastated when he realizes that his great achievement was not only a fraud, but also the cause of 2 deaths. Sometime later, in the university courtyard, Patrick and Sophie say goodbye. The atmosphere is calm, almost melancholy. Patrick tells her that her debt is paid, and that if any of her future lovers end up dead, he hopes she will not call him. Sophie smiles sadly and confesses that her career as a scientist is over, so she will probably return to working as a private psychiatrist. Patrick gives her a chaste kiss on the cheek and wishes her luck. Then he walks away, knowing that some people come into our lives not to stay, but to help us survive them. If you enjoyed this episode, don't stop here. Head over to my channel and check out the complete playlist of The Mentalist, with every episode organized in order from beginning to end. Watch the full series, follow Patrick Jane's journey, and discover all the hidden details, mysteries, and secrets along the way. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more.